Ahum, and we continue with our shamanic earth and galactic shamanic trance uh, theories and the neuroscience of it all. And this, the information that I am going to share with you comes from Harvard. Yes, from Harvard. And I wanted to talk to you guys about it, about what I've explored, what I have found. So the neuroscience of trance, and this was written by Gary Boas, Boas. Okay. And this was back in 2015. So a lot has changed. Okay. It's going to be 10 years in 2025. But a lot has changed because we all know that the world and existence and reality is going through another shift, right? Everybody's going through it. If you haven't figured this out yet, I think you need to talk to someone. Um, trance states, spirit worlds, uh, journeys within ourselves, but through our consciousness. And shamans usually add drumming, which actually allows us to immerse our energy with the drum spirit. Yes, with the drum spirit. They haven't figured that one out yet, but they will. They will. They just can't put an EEG on the drum, right? Right. So the drum spirits. Um, and what is it that the shaman really looks for? Well, they're looking for medicine. They don't just go there to get the 10 o'clock news. That's not what shamans do. We don't trance, we don't journey to get the gist of the 10 o'clock news. On the contrary, we're going to get solution, results, right? And guidance and wisdom. And to actually connect to something that is not negative, which is, it's basically all around us. We just have to move away from that reality and go into truth and integrity, which we do um, by moving out of our chakras and our uh, into our souls. Now, what is it that we get? Well, we get knowledge, we get wisdom, we get clarity, we get insight, we get medicines, we get a lot. We travel, we journey uh, to bring back fragmented souls, soul pieces, so that we can bring wholeness back into people that are in this reality. We do it with soul retrievals. And not only can we do that, but we can also illuminate aspects of our lives and the lives of others. We can do desprendimientos. We can do all kinds of wonderful work. But as a shaman, no fluff, no theatrics, none of that. Would you think that I'm a shaman? Do I look like a shaman? I think I look like a grandma the last time that somebody called me a grandma. I don't remember. I think it was in January. Somebody said, "Oh, you look like a little grandma." But I'm not a grandma. Can't wait for that to happen. But we are able to receive that clarity, that medicine, because when we bring it here into this reality, it becomes something incredible. And sometimes the clarity that we receive there, what happens is when we move away from trance and come back into this reality, we're like, why didn't I think of that before? That was so easy. Yeah, because we work with so many energies at the same time. And sometimes we do fall into the energy that doesn't really work for us. And as a shaman, this is not the end. This is not your final stage. This is not graduation. This is only the beginning when you hit the Earth Shaman path, and you think you finished the Earth Shaman path, which you never do, because here we are again going through a major shift in reality, in this reality, and everything that we've learned now gets up one more notch. So I don't know if you shamans at this point, we're in February of 2023, there's a whole lot of journeying that we're doing, a whole lot of requests that we are asking for our ancestors to help us with. But as shamanic rituals continue to evolve, because they do, yeah, we follow the old rituals. But have you really looked at are we really doing the ritual exactly the way they did it thousands of years ago? No, we're not. And that is the fact of the matter. Is it working? Yes. Because in our state of consciousness, when we are in that altered state of consciousness, we are able to transcend space and time. We are able to get the medicine, the information, the clarity, the wisdom from those that were already here. And not only that, we're getting it as well from those that are here now, and we're tapping into those that are about to come. So how interesting is that? Look at this. Look at the time. Wait, can you see the time? 11:11. Cute. So as we as as I go through this and the neuroscience of trance, because you need to know what the neuroscience of trance is. I think at this point we all need to be in that space. Okay. Um how, as part of the human experience for a shaman, if you take the biological basis of achieving a trance state, and you put it all together, all throughout the history of shamanism, and yes, bring in present and future. When you really bring it into the science, the neuroscience, um, and the neuroscience of the actual alter, getting to that altered state of consciousness during a trance state, nobody knows nothing. Why? Well, because we haven't gotten there yet. This is now. This just happened maybe 20 years ago, when they said, "Oh, by the way, this is happening in this community. Let's go and check out that community." And they're checking out the community. They're still checking out the community. But they figured out a lot of things, but we're still in the beginning stages of what being able to go into trance in an altered state of consciousness. Um, and again, these are all big scientific organizations that are taking their time, money, and effort to find out if there's something better out there. Because shamans do bring back medicine, powerful spiritual medicine, and is able to help. the human conditions. It just makes it harder when the human body then has a disease that takes form. Therefore, all the work that shamans do is off body. And not only is it off body, when we talk about the work that we do off body, where do we go? Where are we? Yes, we're working from an altered state of consciousness in our heads, in our brains. That has been measured. Everybody's done an EEG. Everybody's done an MRI. Everybody's seen all the things that happen. And yes, visually, they connected that visual part of our brains. And yes, things are happening. Yeah, they've gone through all that. But it works. So where do we go? What happens? Well, a lot of things happen. And this is where the galactic shamanism comes into play. This is where galactic shamanism, even though we start in the body and we go into trance state and we do go into an altered state of consciousness, then we still move out of body. As opposed to the earth shaman, yes, they do visit the different realms. The consciousness is still in body. But with the shamanic, the galactic shaman, our consciousness leaves the host. Just imagine with a little tether. And then we can actually move away from the body system. And we get help. And there's no way that we can get lost. This is not astral traveling. And this is by far a remote viewing session. Okay, so don't make sure you separate all that. All those are wonderful tools. But with a shaman, that is not what we use. Okay. Now, so these places, these scientific organizations, they're actually thinking that this is some kind of a phenomenon because they're seeing it through measurements and all these different types of machines and scientific stuff that they use, right? I don't want to use big words because I don't want to lose everybody with this. Okay. So what happened? Well, you got people like in Harvard where they got 15 shamans. They got them from Austria and Germany, right? And they agreed to participate in an experiment. And they used the advanced technique, functional MRI, the MRI, that loud machine. So imaging, they took pictures inside the MRI while the shamans were either entering into or remaining out of trance while listening to drumming. Now, they didn't say if there was drumming played from a radio or let's say YouTube or something like that, or from a track, or if there was somebody actively drumming there. They didn't say that. But what they did see was that the MRI revealed a lot about the connection that was happening in the shaman's brains, all of the shaman's brains. Okay. Now, what are these connections? These connections are functional links between parts or regions of the brain while or during them being in trance. What did they see? Well, they saw the increased connectivity. And okay, so I'm going to tell you the regions of the brain, and then it's your research to go in there into Google and find these places in a picture of a brain. Okay. So they found increased connectivity in the posterior cingulate cortex. Um, it's like a hub, like a main hub. It's really one of the main, one of a few main hubs that internally directs thought. Okay, so they found in this hub that internally directs thought had increased connectivity in that part of the brain, the posterior cingulate cortex. But not only that, they found that in the insula and interior cingulate cortex, which embodied two core control network regions, that also had increased connectivity. So what happened was that these two areas were connecting in a way that extended and kind of produced the directed state during trance. So there is evidence that your brain is actually functioning and creating and producing the trance state. I know for a fact that even in mediumship this happens. Okay? Now, they also noticed that during the trance state, decreased connectivity in the auditory pathway of the brain. What does that mean? Remember, in that MRI room, there was drumming. Right? In that MRI, they were listening to drumming. And that drumming is repetitive. And that is very ritualistic in every shamanic ceremony. But the fact that the brain was able to make it a predictable pattern, drum pattern, it needed no additional processing. It was the vehicle. Remember how I mentioned the spirit drum? The drum has a spirit. It was already integrated. I'm saying it as a person, non-scientific. That they haven't found it because they don't have the technology yet, but that is what happens in the shamanic brain. The brain no longer needs that stimulus. It already knows that the spirit of that drum exists. And that's one of the reasons why that in that trance state, the connectivity in the auditory pathway of the brain, that decreased. But it decreases because it's already part of the frequency within the body, within the brain, within the process. We'll hear about that in another. Hopefully somebody's going to realize that. So this shows that yes, drumming, yeah, it's wonderful to induce trance. It also shows that the predictability of external stimulus, such as the drum, the spirit of that drum, the spirit of song and chanting, the spirit of whatever it is that you're using as a stimulus to get you in and out of trance, helps the shaman disengage from the actual external environment. That adds to the journey process. That adds to the shaman being able to go into an altered state, the earth shaman into the altered state and visit and journey the three realms. But it also brings in the awareness that the galactic shaman does go through the three, but also connects to the oneness, to the quantum field directly. And there's more than the quantum field. We're just going there for now, right? Because it's what you know that is the ultimate place to go until further notice. Okay? But again, why would a shaman do that? Why would anyone do that? Well, because internally we are in a self-directed state that allows us to bring in clarity and insight, not only because it's part of the ritual, let's say it's an illumination, or we're doing a desprendimiento, or we're doing whatever it is that we're going to do, a shamanic journey, whatever you want to call it. It's what we designed at that moment that was going to happen. Then we get directed, and then we follow, and then things happen. Especially when we learn that we are the tool. When a shaman realizes that they are the tool, and when a shaman understands that it's no longer, it's not that, oh, well, no, we we're touching spirit, or we're talking with spirit, or the realms and all of this. It's not just that. It's a lot more than that, right? And because we're human, we have to follow, we have to understand what happened, right? What happens? Well, when since we're talking about brain changes, right? Especially during a shamanic trance, because some of you go into trance and you really don't know what's going on with your brain. It's just you've been taught how to do this, and you do it well without asking the question. But there's nothing wrong with that. If you came to this reality and you told yourself, I'm not going to ask any questions. At some point, I'm going to know what's going on. Of course, you're going to know what's going on. This is me trying to explain to you guys how neuroscience has anything to do with what we do as shamans, right? So there have been numerous altered state of consciousness, neuroimaging studies, and electrophysiological studies, right? And some of those studies include dissociative conditions, meditation, hypnosis, etc., right? And yet, a lot of this science still can't pinpoint, can't touch that altered state of consciousness during these conditions, right? And while they see it with a measurement machine that they have that take measurements that show the MRI, the EEG, all these other things that they use, they still haven't been able to touch the altered state. They see it in the brain. They see that the brain is reacting in different regions when they bring in things like drumming, flutes, and all those beautiful things. However, what it has been able to do, these studies, what they have been able to do is just shed light on how the brain works, right? This is more of the self, right? So some self-induced state of consciousnesses journeys um, were seen in diverse tribal settings, healing to help with social cohesion, right? But take the Mongolian shamans. They are capable of self-inducing a trance without external sensory stimulation. Now, what they used with these people was, yes, a quantitative EEG and the Loretta. The Loretta is a machine. It's a tomography, a low resolution electromagnetic tomography. And what it does is it images. It takes images, takes pictures, right? What they when they got a Mongolian shaman and they had him go into trance, what they saw was that the shamanic state of consciousness actually involved a shift, a visual shift from the normally dominant left analytical to the right of self-experience or experiential mode, right? And from the more normal dominant anterior to the prefrontal of the posterior somatosensory mode, they saw this. Now, what what did they see? Well, they saw what they understood implications for the psychobiology of the normal conscious mode of awareness and neurophysiological process contributing to the dissociative, psychotic, transpersonal domains of self experience. Now, here is where the Western medicine discovered that these could potentially be traditional healing techniques, and they are. They always have. Now, the fact of the matter is that shamanic states of consciousness goes far back to the middle Paleolithic uh, era. That's about 70 to, yeah, about 70,000 years ago, right? This is where there was a supposedly cognitive revolution going on. What does this represent? Well, it represents humanity's most ancient spiritual tradition. It is, right? As we know it today. So, what anthropologists have found, uh, neurophysiologists have found with all this data is that altered modes of consciousness does in truth shed light on the brain's mechanism of self, how the brain sees self, how it creates that self. Uh, so while we incorporate all these tests, we find that when we are dealing with, let's say, like right now, we're in our waking, this is a normal uh, waking consciousness, right? We're rationalizing right now, right? Based on what I'm giving you, the video, and you're hearing, and you're trying to put one thing together with the other, right? there is an entirely different consciousness somewhere else. And it happens at the same time. Oh my God, Mary, what are you talking about? As we go through the series, you're going to, little by little, you're going to start understanding more and more and more about what is actually happening. But even though the Western hemisphere wants to believe whatever it is that they want to believe, there is a contrast that is playing out here. While they've done more than 500 studies, yet out of those, about almost 60% of these were transes that people call possession trance, right? And we're going to leave it at that because I'm not going to go into this more because it is considered an anomalous experience. It is considered a culture-bound religious and or spiritual belief kind of factoring that they're saying is making that 50, almost 60%. But what they did realize was this was really happening. And while they still call it a phenomenon based on behavioral factors and what they've learned in literature and all those beautiful things, there is a one common mode of consciousness that they've been able to show that it bridges ordinary and altered state experience, altered state experiences. Okay, and it has to do with focusing your attention, right? So, how wonderful is it that we are able to go into a shamanic state, altered state of consciousness, and we can work out disassociation, that fight or flight, right? With alternatives, with solutions, with focus-based work, right? And then we can bring that and normalize the integration of perception, feelings, thoughts, verbal, reflective consciousness, right? When we go into these altered states and we come out of the altered state, we are in full control of what it is that we go, where it is that we go. We understand we're going to go into trance. We understand what we're going to go get. We understand what we need to do with this, right? While the scientific and the scientific world is it's still calling it a phenomenon, right? But when we are able to come out and we are able to help that individual by doing and going into our state with or without psychoactive drugs, adding drumming, adding environmental triggers, maybe teepee, maybe sweat lodge, maybe uh, just under a beautiful tree inside a cave, dancing, chanting, singing, right? It is still considered a shamanic journey. And what we're trying to get to is to create an altered state of consciousness. And we do that to facilitate the help that either the whole tribe needs, or perhaps a group of people need, or perhaps you need for yourself or for your client. So let's look at ecstatic trance. This is where the shaman spirit leaves the body and communicates with animal or other spirits in their domains, not our domain, their domain. Then there's the possession trance, where the animal or other spirits enter the shaman's body, sometimes to the exclusion of his or own self, right? Unless it is their higher self, or they are in another dimension, in another reality that they're able to come forth. And that does happen quite a bit. But the possession trance is very, very widely used, where there is a spirit that does enter the body's energy field and is able to work through that while your consciousness is in that altered state, or else there's no entrance. Okay. And then the dreamlike trance, which is when the shaman remains in possession, right, of the self, and then meets an animal or other spirit, but the domain where they go is ultimately very shared, shared, right? There's just so much, but so to talk more about the psychophysiology of the altered and shamanic state of consciousness. And we already talked about the neurophysiological markers that scientists have already documented, all the different trance states, which, by the way, includes yoga, transcendental meditation, the psychedelic experiences with actual hallucinogenic drugs. We're talking here mediumship, psychography, hypnosis, and shamanic states, right? Right? So what happens? Well, the shift in consciousness actually shifts over towards the right hemisphere, that dominant part of the right hemisphere. And then the right hemisphere activates, and the left hemisphere begins to function with within its own realm. Okay, hold on just a moment and let me take this call. So, thank you for letting me take that call. So, we saw those brain functions, the left and the right, how one, how there was a generalized shift towards the right hemisphere, right? And then we also saw, or they saw, a bigger area of amplitude. Okay, amplitude is when it grows, the growth, a bigger area. And then when you read it, it's more like it's a higher of something, of the alpha band in this particular case, from 8 to 13 hertz. That activity in the alpha band, it just grew, right? And what happened was that there was a synchronization with the anterior and posterior. areas, right? And again, we're talking about sine waves or frequencies, right? You know the sine waves? Okay. So those oscillations, that's what they're called, oscillations. They're hypothesizing. I'm sure that they're hypothesizing, but it's not really. Where that came from was from the thalamocortical feedback loops, right? And those loops are responsible for somatosensory binding. So it's just, it is evident that this happened. They have it on paper, they have it on film, they have it on all these realities that it is. Now, what happened was that the theta power, there was an increase in theta power and short synchronous bursts of actual high voltage theta waves between 4 and 7 hertz. And those are usually distinct from the regularly seen states when you are normally drowsy or going into a sleep state. But it actually, when they measured it and they got enough people that they were able to read this, they were able to do the correlation between what is this? How is this? Okay, so when they asked enough questions, everybody was able, the majority were able to say, oh yeah, well this is in correlation with, we all felt this blissful awareness, right? And visual imagery, right? And the actual breakdown of ego boundaries happened during this increased theta power and short synchronous bursts of high voltage theta waves. So from 4 to 7, as it increased, people were actually in this blissful awareness, right? With this beautiful and vivid and rich imagery, visual imagery, right? And their ego boundaries were gone. Now, theta frequencies, they have to do with the coherent limbic activity and the septal areas. So the septal areas, you've got the amygdala, you've got the hippocampus and its ability to project to association, right? So this is where you are able to feel emotions, where your cognitive functions reside, where memory and how you process memory, how all that goes into place, right? So, and then the gamma power thought, right? Increased gamma power and the way that that works into our thinking system. But that increased gamma power we spoke about in the first series video. So what happens when there's an increased gamma power, it is thought that it represents a diffuse cortical activation and integration of conscious information and the way that it processes the conscious information. So we are still in perfect conscious awareness of what is happening. Our brain is doing its thing. We are in a trance, but we can very easily come out and in being in full conscious awareness. Whether, we're going to be able to get out of that trance easier without psychotropic. That's the only difference, I think, that there truly, truly is. Because the psychotropic effects have to leave the body for a while. But yet when you are Am I an advocate for non-psychotropic? Yes, I am, if you guys want to know. Is it going to take a little longer for us to get to that conscious state? Yeah. To that altered state? Yes. Right? But the fact is that the studies show that this is real, that it does happen, right? They did a comparison between the EEG of the left and the frontal lobes of the brains for all these shamans. And yet, when they did the comparisons, they were able to show that everything does synchronize with what it is that they were looking for, and what they found. They were able to go, aha, well, this is what happens at aha. What I love about these studies is that there was proof of a generalized shift toward the parasympathetic dominance and the actual release of endogenous opioids, right? Which may be responsible, and they say may be, right, of decreased pain, or the perception of decreased pain, right? So hold on, let me get this next one. Okay. So what are endogenous opioids? It's not a pill. No, it's not drugs. Endogenous opioids are a class of molecules that are produced in the brain and circulate widely throughout all organ systems. Endogenous opioids are neuropeptides. Neuropeptides. Where are neuropeptides created? In our brains. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And these were produced. And there was, and there is bliss, there is a feeling of ecstasy, and there's certainly decreased pain. All right. Now, there's so much more data out there for us to really read and all that. But the purpose these um, of these series is so that you guys can understand, right, how it is that we can go into um, a trance or an altered state, and we are able to work on the entire human body. And if we are able to produce these neuropeptides, and we are able, and they can see it, they're actually seeing it, they're measuring it, they're seeing it. Imagine what we can do if everyone would be able to do this, if everyone would be able to learn how to bring bliss, how to create bliss, how to create neuropeptides that will constantly help with pain, with psychotic disorders, with dissociative disorders, with any disorder, with pain, with any disease that we could possibly even think of, that we can get the brain to work with. And how is it that we're doing it? Very easily. We're going into trance. we're going into trance. And going into trance allows us to help not only ourselves, but our clients. So, yes, and imagine how much more we can do when we finally do hit that shamanic, that galactic shamanism, because then we're not only bringing comfort to certain people and ourselves, but we're also working with bringing comfort to the entire universe. That is where we all need to be. That's where we need to be shifting towards. But first, we have to know how to be gentle with our journey here as Earth shamans. But we can do it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this wasn't too boring. Have a great day.